Are you frustrated with trying to figure out why your child struggles with coordination, balance, and focus, even after doing exercises and physical therapy for months? Sometimes a big piece of the puzzle is something called retained primitive reflexes. These are early reflexes in infancy that should go away by the time infancy is over, but sometimes they don't. When they stick around, it's like your child's brain gets stuck in infant mode, and that just changes everything. It changes how their mood is, how they're learning, focusing, and how they regulate emotions, just to name a few. When we adjust the nervous system directly and precisely, we see that the primitive reflexes begin to resolve naturally. And that's because we are opening up the pathways between the brain and the body, but we're also strengthening that portion of the brain that was once before weak. Hey everyone, I'm Dr. Steve Lako with Lako Family Chiropractic, and early on in my career, I used to focus on reflex integration exercises, which are just specific movements that you give in order to connect those neurological pathways. And while that can help, and it did help tremendously, it just took a lot of time and consistency. But what we've found throughout the years of doing this is that there's something so much more powerful. When they don't integrate, it's as if the body is still stuck in that baby mode, at least in that center of the brain. And that's why we can start seeing things like balance issues and coordination. We can see kids that prefer to walk on their toes rather than flat foot. So they have walking issues. We can see things like emotional outbursts and just overall sensitivity. Sometimes these kiddos don't like feeling certain fabrics or clothing. Sometimes they have tough time with textures in their mouth, with the foods that they eat. They can have problems with reading and writing as well. And this isn't so much as like a disciplinary thing where they just need more discipline because they're having outbursts or they don't like the clothes on their skin. It's a neurological issue because that area of their brain hasn't matured yet. Primitive reflexes are the automatic reflexes or automatic movements that we're all born with as a survival mechanism. So things like the Moral reflex, the ATNR, Babinski, Gallant, Rudy, like all those reflexes. And they're there for a very important purpose, is for our survival at a very young age, for us to start to be able to do things like roll over and walk and feed, all those things. After we're able to do those, for the first 6 to 12 months after that period, those reflexes should really be going away. If they're not, what's happening is when the brain starts to develop over time, these higher levels of brain centers start to develop. And when we have a retained primitive reflex, that means that something got stuck along that pathway, and that is not a good thing. So we need to make sure that we're looking at the neurology and the brain development to make sure that we're getting through that gateway, through that door that's shut for them, and we need to make sure that we open up those pathways. When the brainstem, which is the area of the brain that primitive reflexes originate, when that becomes overactive, remember from other videos that we've done where the brain grows from bottom up and back forward, right? So the brain stem's in the very bottom. As the child ages, the brain develops into these higher brain areas and centers, but what happens is that brainstem just gets stuck on overdrive and it keeps working when it should be shutting down somewhat with these primitive reflexes as higher centers of the brain take over. So that's what we have to start understanding with why these signals of retained primitive reflexes are still there. So why do some of these kids keep these primitive reflexes? I mean, I've seen primitive reflexes retained in full-grown adults. So it comes down to any kind of interference or stress early in development. And that can be with birth trauma, which is the number one. It can be, birth trauma is like the umbrella for all these other things. That could be C-section, forceps, vacuum extraction, prolonged labor. Then we can get into like the developmental delays, sensory processing disorders, things like that, which we can usually correlate back to birth trauma or tough pregnancy. And then the third thing can be like chronic stress. So the child either dietary emotional stressors, physical or chemical stressors, things like that can all combine to create these issues. When those adjustments start to calm the nervous system down so that it can start regulating and opening up those pathways between the brainstem, the cerebellum, and the cortex, some amazing things happen. So there's no like forcing, there's no over exercises, there's no overstimulating the nervous system with these exercises as well. It's just calming and re-regulating and remapping that nervous system to strengthen it in that way. In our office for years, I was giving parents different integrative reflex exercises to do at home with their child to be able to stimulate that portion of their brain and make it stronger. So the theory is if we do specific motions and movements with the child, it will stimulate that neural pathway to the portion of the brain that's lagging, and it'll make it stronger, right? But it wasn't the fastest results that we could possibly get. It was very hard on the parents because you have these little kids and you're trying to do these exercises sometimes 3 sessions out of the day, and you have to do these exercises up to 30 times in that session. So we're talking about 90 times in that day. It's just a lot. So the results were there, but they were slow and sometimes inconsistent. And it wasn't until I started really getting into neurologically based chiropractic care, I started adopting different technologies to have in the office to be able to see and tap into different portions of the nervous system to see what is going on within the brain and the nervous system. And then we could get a very clear picture of how to precisely adjust these kiddos, more precision, less adjustments in that time period of that visit for the office, so that their bodies can handle the adjustments and the huge impact that we're having on the neurology of the kiddo. And only when we started doing that, we started seeing these primitive reflexes going away without having to do those exercises. And then we get to hear about the best part of our job. Like the child starts to meet their milestones, they start to do better in school, their focus is better, they have better communication with their parents because they're not so much focused on all these other different things. They can fine-tune their conversations and their focus and their ideas and their thoughts. They also sleep better, they also eat better. Just all these things start to stack up with better, because we're re-regulating and remapping that brain and that nervous system. If your child's gone through challenges, like all kids do, but if they've gone through these specific challenges that really nothing that you've done has really accelerated them doing much better, coordination, balance, focus, things in school, sleep, all these different things, right? It could come down to that one missing piece is that nervous system's just not working or functioning properly. I'm Dr. Steve Lako with Lako Family Chiropractic. I'd love for you to subscribe and like this page so that you can get more on child development and any kind of neurological things that we cover with child development and infancy. If you've been watching some of my other videos on my channel, you'll notice that there's a lot of different areas of neurology that can be affected, causing a bunch of different symptoms. And these symptoms, they tend to overlap, which makes it a little bit challenging to find out what the root cause of your kid's issues are. That's why we incorporate a lot of different things in the office to map out the nervous system. And in this specific situation where we have retained reflexes, where the child's brain in that area is stuck in that infancy mode where that brainstem's just working overtime when it's not supposed to. It's kind of like it's supposed to have retired or be on vacation, and then last minute, no way, you're still going to work overtime all the time. These higher centers of the brain are supposed to take over, right? So with these specific neurological adjustments, we can allow those areas to grow up, to get stronger, and to have everything working properly. So these retained reflexes don't need to be there. They can be resolved naturally. And just remember, when the nervous system regulates, everything from movement to mood starts to fall into place.